Hey Southside, good morning once again, and welcome to another episode of Jumpstart at Home. We're live both on Facebook and on your radio sets, and every morning we strive to invite different people from different walks of life to talk to us about their experiences dealing with the pandemic. Now, we've had a mom who just gave birth, an actual COVID survivor, doctors, artists, and more talk to us about how they're dealing with the pandemic, and now we're talking to somebody who's been in the front lines of this fight for as long as this has been going on. Now, straight from the United Kingdom, we go back across the pond. Here we have Jacob Ramos. Hey, Jacob.
Hi, John. It's Jacob Reyes, by the way.
Reyes, I'm sorry. Good morning. Okay, Jacob,
Good morning.
tell Southside what you do in dealing with the pandemic.
So I'm currently a nurse here in London. I work in the acute assessment unit. We basically receive all patients from A&E and do necessary interventions and screenings before they go to the proper ward. In terms of dealing with the pandemic, so at this time now, it has slowed down a bit, but during the peak of it, um, we only have limited ITU beds. So we sort of stepped up and we became like a semi ITU, and we had those big machines and stuff.
Okay, hold on a second. What is an ITU?
Oh, that's our here. That's intensive therapy unit. So in the Philippines, we call it intensive care,
Hmm.
basically.
Oh, I see. All right, so Southside, Jacob here is a nurse in a hospital that actually takes in COVID patients. And you were also here in the Philippines, you also had some nursing experience, right?
Yes, I was a nurse for 2.5 years.
Hmm.
I was
Now,
working in a private hospital. Yeah,
right now, you're based in London for how many years now?
more than 5 years.
Wow. So you've been a career nurse for almost 8 years, almost a decade. Now, what
Yeah.
I want to know is in the Philippines, we've just breached the 100,000 confirmed case mark. In the UK, there are 306,000 confirmed cases and 46,210 deaths. How has your government there been dealing with this massive spike, massive numbers, and your hospital personally?
So at the start of the pandemic, everyone here is aware that the response was a bit slow, and we had the same problems as other countries when the pandemic started. But at the moment, we have strict screening procedures now. So we have divided our A&E. So we call our emergency department here A&E, which means accident and emergency. So we divided it into a red
Okay.
and green zone. So anybody having any symptoms will be directed to the red zone, and you're not allowed to enter the A&E itself. You have to wait outside, be in a queue, and then somebody will assess you for the symptoms before you're even allowed to the building. So that's one of the measures introduced. And recently,
Mm-hmm.
they've started quarantine. So everyone flying from Europe and other countries, there are certain countries that they've identified wherein if you come to the United Kingdom, you will now be quarantined for 14 days. And then
Uh-huh.
in
Okay.
terms of ward situation, no, but so basically everyone from A&E goes to us, which is the AAU or the Acute Assessment Unit, and we keep them there until we have the COVID negative status. So we don't mix them with all the other negative patients that are upstairs. So we basically keep all the queries, all the possible cases on
Uh-huh.
ground, yeah, level one or level two in the hospital. Yeah.
So have you interfaced with severe COVID patients, or Or is that sequestered away from the ward that you're serving in?
No, I'm in the ward that deal face to face with these COVID patients. So
Oh my goodness.
between March till late May, I handled loads of proper like COVID positive patients. And although we were not fully trained with the machines, we had to do like a quick training to be able to use the CPAP machine. So CPAP means continuous positive airway pressure. So when you
Okay.
have COVID, basically much of your lung space will be filled with inflammation and pus and
Mm-hmm.
basically the whole COVID infection. You won't be able to breathe properly, and there is a certain point wherein regardless of the amount given, regardless of the amount of oxygen given to you, you still won't meet your target saturations and you start to tire, and there is a certain criteria that you need to meet, and then the doctors will need to start you on this machine. So the machine does um, what it does is it introduces a positive pressure, so it basically helps you to push air into your lungs, and it doesn't feel good when you have COVID. It's not something that you'd want to see at any point in your life. You like most of them, they've told me that they wanted to die rather than suffer
Oh
this,
no.
kind of have this machine on them, and not really knowing if they're going to survive or not. It's their feeling is really really bad, and because
Oh.
of the no visitors policy, they feel lonely, isolated, and you have this machine beside you making this loud noise, and air is being pushed into your lungs. If you put yourself in the patient's shoe, it's a like a really really bad experience, but it's necessary to keep you alive.
I can only imagine. And you having to deal with these patients every day and you also worrying about your own health, how are you coping with that pressure?
To be honest with you, I was on a holiday back in the Philippines for the whole of December and came back around first week of January. So
Uh-huh.
at that time, you still have that holiday feeling and you don't want to come back to work. So I was like, oh, I don't really want to continue working as a nurse, having had that great holiday.
Oh.
And then this came up. So um, I I had to step up and let that go. And I know the risk. We were all informed of the risk, and we had same issues with PPE as with all the other countries. When you first start until the production gets increased and you get more PPE. So we had the same situation basically. And
Uh-huh.
yes, you do worry. So I do worry when I come to work. And at the very peak of it, there was a point wherein I really didn't want to go to work.
Oh.
Here in the UK, to keep everyone safe, so everyone that is not necessary in terms of dealing with the pandemic had to stay at home, and then they were given 80% of their salary. So that's called a furlough.
Uh-huh.
So in my mind, I was like, oh, everyone else is at home. They're having time with their family. They're safe from this virus, and they're still getting 80% of their salary. And then us, nurses and doctors, all other frontline workers, we don't have that kind of benefit or, um,
Oh no?
privilege to stay at home. Yeah, because we have to,
Okay.
regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not, we have to go to work in the hospital.
But what about your monetary compensation? Because here in the Philippines, it's quite a hot topic that there are some nurses who have chosen to, I'm sorry, there are some medical workers who've chosen to either resign or to discontinue working because of lack of pay, lack of a clear plan for their safety, and just overall overwhelming feelings. Are you
So that is
experiencing the
still
same there?
that's still an ongoing issue here. So in terms, if you look at it
Oh,
from a Philippine standpoint, like you come from a country that has a salary of what, let's say 10,000 pesos or even less depending on the
Mm-hmm.
institution, and you come here and you have this salary, for you this will be enough. But for if you've been here and if you look at the salary rates for all types of other jobs here, we are actually at the a very low bracket, nurses.
Oh,
So it's an
wow. So
ongoing
it's a
issue.
global issue.
Yeah, it is. So there's an issue ongoing because how the members of parliament here get like a raise every year, and then whereas nurses, there was a point a few years back wherein our yearly increase was put on hold because of economic crisis and all that.
Uh-huh.
And now they've just released news last week that they've specified certain occupations that they're going to increase the salary, but nurses were not included because in 2017 there was a deal made
Uh-huh.
that for the next 3 years from 2017 nurses would get a raise, but the rate agreed during that time is not enough to
Uh-huh.
cover the cost of inflation. So basically, even though on
Okay.
paper it looks like you're getting something every year, your salary gets a little bit bigger every year, but if you match it with the cost of living, all the other expenses, we're actually at a negative, and we need our
Wow.
salary to be increased a little bit more so that we can cope with the inflation and all the costs of living here in London or in UK in general.
Now, London is one of the most expensive cities to live in, almost at
Definitely.
par, or if not more expensive than Singapore. Now,
Yeah, I think so.
when you first moved to London, to the UK, were you planning to spend to be in the nursing industry for a long time, or were you planning to come back eventually?
So for me, when I graduated, so I've always had this aim to work abroad.
Uh-huh.
Because reality bites us. You can't really get anywhere staying in the Philippines with that amount of salary. So for me,
Okay.
I didn't really think for long term. Like I just wanted to go abroad and try it out. But now that I'm
Mm-hmm.
here, it's not too bad. It depends really on the person, because if you're like an emotional person and you can't stay away from your family for a long time, then it really won't work out
Mm-hmm.
for you. So for me, I don't have children. I'm single, so my only attachment is to my to my mom, to my grandmother, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's not that hard. And I've been here for 5 years, so I've managed that long. So I guess if things improve, then I might be staying here for longer.
Now, in March, no, on March 27 of this year, during the peak of the coronavirus, the first peak of the coronavirus outbreak, your prime minister, Boris Johnson, had contracted the disease.
Hmm.
How did that impact your healthcare policy and the morale of the nurses? Because Boris hadn't been very serious about the pandemic when it first came out.
I guess for him that was a wake up call, and it's a wake up call for everyone. It goes to show that the virus doesn't choose whether you're a prime minister or you're
Uh-huh.
a cleaner or you're a nurse or you're a delivery man. So it doesn't choose. So that's a wake up call to everyone, and I think from that point, people started taking it a lot more seriously. But in terms of policy, our guidelines change here like every at the peak of the pandemic. They change like almost every day depending on the new evidence that surfaces. But in terms
Uh-huh.
of like long-term policy, um, there hasn't been much change because of
Okay.
Boris having the virus.
Okay. So is it still bin it, kill it? What was that? What was the campaign again?
Which one is that?
So um, I read that the government had initiated this campaign early in March to track, contain, and then eradicate the virus, which is basically what most governments around the world are doing, but without a vaccine being available until at least middle of next year. Are you saying that the government hasn't changed track yet?
So no, it it has been it has been improved. They're trying to introduce now. They're trialing a certain app
Mm-hmm.
wherein if you go to, so all the pubs, places where you dine in here in UK now, there is a queue. You need to download an app, and before you go in, you need to scan the stores or the restaurant's code, so you
Oh.
register as being there at that time. So everyone who's there can be traced. So if somebody suddenly becomes, COVID positive, then they know who were there on that day and were exposed to the person. So we can track
Oh,
everyone.
wow,
But
okay.
it's still on trial. It's still on trial, and I don't think everybody has downloaded the app. It still needs a bit of a push.
Uh-huh. Well, so that's a fascinating use of technology.
Yeah, yeah, I think if I'm not wrong, South Korea was the first one to sort of develop that kind of,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, app.
Now, there are also some criticisms as to how this pandemic is being handled by most governments, either with policymakers refusing to adhere to the policies they're making, or others who are outright denying the existence of this pandemic. You professionally, as a nurse, can
Mhm.
what do you have to say for people who say that this is just a quote scamdemic?
Okay. So for this kind of people, I don't know. Even if you give them loads of evidence, they will still. It's sort of instilled in their minds, and they have a very strong conviction about it. I guess although you don't want to wish it on them, but I think
Uh-huh.
the most um, the only thing that can really, splash water on their face and say this is real is if they actually get it. But
Oh
I
gosh,
will
no.
tell them that, COVID is definitely real. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen the type of suffering that patients go through, and you don't want to have it. Definitely, you'd rather suffer, all types of other diseases, that can easily be cured. But this one, this is something you want to avoid. And I've
Now,
experienced it myself actually,
mm-hmm.
although at that time we didn't have staff testing, but I isolated
Uh-huh.
for 14 days as well. So basically, in our flat, we are all nurses, and
Okay.
one person started having the symptoms. And at that, this was at the start of the pandemic, and there was still no staff testing. So one person started having fever and then cough, and then, we're flats here in London are very small. I'll be honest with you. So
Oh,
you can't really maintain like even a 1 meter distance if you want to cook, and then two people are in the kitchen. You can't really maintain a 2 meter distance. So you will definitely pass on things. If if you're not careful, unless you isolate yourself just inside the room. But the thing is, you don't really know when you already started having it. So it's difficult
yes,
for you
yes.
to say, I'm going to isolate now because I know I have it. You won't know it. And even if when you start having symptoms, that's not the first day that you caught it or you can spread it.
Yes, that's right. You mentioned something about staff testing. Are medical staff being routinely tested for COVID-19 in the UK?
So it depends on the institution. Where I'm working
Mm-hmm.
now, it's not routine, but if you start having symptoms, so you will be required to isolate. and then
Uh-huh.
there's a form that's being filled out, and you have to go to, there's a special, it's like sort of like a trailer. No, it's like a, how do you call it? It's basically like a trailer car outside
Like
the
a van?
hospital, wherein yeah, no, yeah, you're right. It's a container van, a makeshift container van, wherein you get tested, and you are emailed your results. If you are negative and you have no more fever, even if you haven't finished your 14 days yet, you will be called back to work. But if you turn
Okay.
out positive, so you stay quarantined for 14 days. But if on day 14 you're still having fever or other symptoms, then you will extend for another 7 days, and the cycle continues until you are symptom free.
How fast can you get your results when you get tested?
The next day, I think the results you can process it in. You can process your results in less than 4 hours, but because of the queue,
I mean,
and they have to email everyone, so it will be the next day.
but still, that's pretty impressive coming from here where we hear about people who get their test results a month after they've tested, some even after
Really.
they've died.
So
Gosh, the
there's no
next
point in that
day.
then, because by that time they would no longer be infectious
Tell me
if they
about
receive
it.
it a
But
month after.
have any of your colleagues ever tested positive?
Yes, but not all of them had a severe case. So there are
Oh,
lots
good.
of
Thank
people who
goodness.
test positive but just have mild symptoms, like just have a cold
Okay.
or just a sore throat or a one-off fever, and that's it. They're lucky.
They are. And with the environment that they're exposed to, it's a near miracle.
Yeah, and I think there's a sort of like your immune response. It depends on the person. There's some kind of immune response to it. Recently,
Uh-huh.
we also had antibody testing. It's weird because we have some people, not the nurses. There were some people tested who are not non-clinical staff. So they were tested for antibodies, and they tested positive for antibodies, which means you have something to protect you if COVID, if you catch
Uh-huh.
COVID again. So some of them
Ever
didn't
gets to you.
understand it,
Uh-huh.
and they retested the following week. Even if that, basically it's not allowed, but they just sent
Uh-huh.
their bloods anyway, and they came back negative. So it goes to show that the antibodies doesn't really last long, and it's not even same for
Mm-hmm.
everyone. So it can be a few days for some, for one person it can be a month, but there's still a lot of things that we don't know about this virus.
So you're saying that even though some of your colleagues have tested positive and they test again and it still shows positive, some of them are still being recalled to work.
Which test are we talking about? Is it the swab or the antibodies?
The antibodies.
No, so antibodies, if you're positive for it, that means you've had it and you now have something to protect you. So you can definitely go to work.
Oh,
If it was the swab test that you came back positive for, then you're not allowed to go to work, because that means you still have the
okay.
virus, and yeah, you can still spread it.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. Overall, are you satisfied with how your hospital and how your district is handling the crisis?
There are certainly points to improve, but I don't really dwell on that anymore, because in the end, everyone had the same problem. What matters is how we responded, how we stepped up, and worked together to fight the virus. And I have to say
Uh-huh.
that when this all became apparent to everyone, we had a good response afterwards, and even the military men were, delivering PPEs to to
Uh-huh.
all the hospitals in the UK. So that's something, and PPE was readily available once it became apparent that this is serious, and they just got loads of PPEs from wherever. And I will say that for my institution, we did have enough PPE, and up to this time, we still have good
Uh-huh.
supply.
Okay, that's good. Now, I'm reading from The Guardian that over 70 virologists, clinical virologists, have criticized the chief medical officer and the chief scientific advisor of England's COVID response team for for sidelining them and excluding them from discussions on how to respond to the pandemic, especially with testing contracts being awarded to private sector companies rather than based on expertise. And we also know that even though the coronavirus cases in the UK aren't increasing, it's still one of the highest in the world. Are you prepared for a sudden explosion of the COVID, like locally there in your district and in your institution?
I think in terms of PPE, we should be able to handle that in terms of trace. So after the first wave died down, we now in no the intensive care unit now introduced training. So I just had that one 2 weeks ago. So we had a basic sort
Uh-huh.
of ITU training, how the ITU looks like, what's the routine, what's the documentation, and how to turn patients. So basically, all COVID patients were put on a prone position because it inflates the back part of the lungs,
Uh-huh.
which is the least oxygenated. So if it does happen again, we will not be as shocked as we were on the first wave. And I've also learned that in the next few months, they are introducing more intensive, like in-depth training of the CPAP machines, OptiFlow, and all those machines necessary um, to support oxygenation and breathing for the patient if there is a second wave.
Well, according to the Philippine Daily Inquirer, that even though Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that COVID-19 is under some measure of control in the UK, there is an expected resurgence in Europe, a second wave.
So there are already signs, and even the prime minister himself acknowledged that in the last few days
Uh-huh.
that there are signs of resurgence in Europe, and that's why they started the 14 days quarantine for such countries that were identified. But in
And
locally, I
although
think we can. Yeah.
uh-huh. Well, the UK is relatively safe from a second explosion in Europe since you are isolated. You are an island off of Europe, off the mainland. Are you I'm not sure about the news though. Are you still under like lockdown for international borders?
Um, no, not total. Let me see. I don't think so. So what's okay? This is one thing I can criticize regarding the border is that even during the peak of the pandemic, there wasn't really like temperature testing and quarantine introduced for people coming into the UK. That's one thing we
What?
all kept criticizing, and it was just recently, and it was already when the first wave, started dying down, that they started introducing these measures, which really doesn't. Well, it prevents the future cases, but at the peak, not there was nothing.
Uh-huh.
So even if you came from,
International travel?
yeah,
International travel was still open?
yes, it was.
What?
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I
Wow.
find it funny
And I
now,
thought we
but
had it bad.
I don't
Now,
know
we're
why.
also reading that schools will also be reopened in the next few months.
That's
By
actually
early
already
September,
postponed.
some
That's
reports
already
indicate.
postponed. I mean, they there was news of having them, opened from July, but obviously that didn't happen. There's loads of talk now that most will
Uh-huh.
have online class, but it really depends on how the next month or two goes. Because at the moment, we are we are now allowed to gather, even if you're not from the same household, up to a group of 6 people. You can meet
Uh-huh.
like in the park or in the restaurant
Yes.
if you
Uh-huh.
wanted to. So we're not in proper lockdown anymore. And there's a new
Yeah.
scheme now
Oh,
to
okay.
boost the economy. They call it Eat Out to Help Out. So they encourage you to dine in
Uh-huh.
to
Okay.
eat the food inside the restaurant, basically, and you have 50% off the food items.
And that is to help revitalize the economy.
Yes, but also it's a bit risky, isn't it? Because we still don't have the vaccine, and
Yeah.
yeah, we don't know all of these as healthy looking people can be carriers. So it's still a risk. So I think they're just trying to balance economy and health, which is a very precarious
How
thing to do.
Now we're also looking at something similar here in Cebu City, where our quarantine level has been scaled down and some public establishments have been opened. How safe is it to go out, let alone dine in at a restaurant when you know that the virus is still spreading?
So as proven here, so we've opened already, like I think 2 weeks, no, more than 2 weeks now, and the only surge that was seen was up north, only because it's a very close knit community, like a province area. Yeah, but in terms
Uh-huh.
of in the city, there haven't been any reports of a resurgence of the case. I guess if you maintain the 2 meter distancing, if you wear mask in public, when you go to stores, when you go to shops, and you wash your hands properly, then I guess it those things really help and make it safer. But it's still not 100%, obviously. But um,
Uh-huh.
if you wanted to revitalize the economy, then these measures can help out with that. Yeah.
So basically, until now, the safest way to avoid the spread of the coronavirus is the same thing that we were taught when it first began, which is maintaining physical distancing, washing and frequent sanitation, and
Yeah.
wearing of masks in the public. Is that being strictly enforced in London?
It is there was a new law introduced. You have to wear mask in shops, supermarkets, places where you are not able to maintain 1 or 2 meter distance away from another person, basically, because like supermarket aisles are a bit narrow, so you can't really maintain that. So yes, that is a law, but some shops here are saying that it is not their job to police the public into wearing masks. So some shops are still allowing people who don't have masks to go inside the shops. And when I read that article, I was like, really? When you when we first had the pandemic and you had your workers, stay at home, the government subsidized, your salary, and you are allowed to be safe at home. And now that we're starting to
Oh
reopen, you
gosh.
don't want to help out to stop the virus from spreading. So
Oh my goodness.
ingratitude, I would say.
Gosh. So
It's
who
quite
is
difficult.
who is tasked to monitor the proper wearing of masks?
So they all say it's for the police, but we all have common sense. We all have the responsibility or duty of to look after each other. So
Uh-huh.
we should all be doing it, and not just rely on police. I mean, it's not just for their safety; it's also for your own safety. And when you
Yes,
wear
it is.
mask, that's not for you. You're protecting the other person. So if every person thinks, "Oh, I'm not gonna wear mask because I'm healthy anyway, and I'm not gonna catch it," then everyone will have the virus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, here in the Philippines, one of the biggest concerns is not having enough disposable masks available. So we resort to reusable masks, which might not be properly cleaned. And there are some people who are advocating the either to not wear masks at all, or in the United States even, there are people who are actively protesting the enforcement of wearing masks. As a medical professional, how do you think this should be addressed?
So, in terms of the proper clinical mask, ideally that should be worn in the hospital where we have the actual cases or where we can possibly meet, you know, people with actual COVID. It
Sorry, excuse me.
is, yeah,
You meant clinical masks as in N95s and
N95 or even the surgical mask with the blue front
okay.
and the white back. Yeah, it it is okay to wear cloth mask. You just need to make sure that if it gets wet, that's no longer effective. So you have to change that. You can wash it as long as
Uh,
you dry it properly and then you can reuse it. So if I don't know if people have seen, there's a video, there's a made in the US, showcasing like a light study wherein you can see how much of the person's breath comes out on a
okay, uh-huh,
normal
yeah.
breathing and cough. So there's a very big difference if you wear mask and between wearing mask and not wearing mask. And even if regardless of the material, having a mask definitely helps out in reducing the droplets coming out and spreading.
Oh,
So you don't have to wear the clinical
okay.
mask if you're not in the hospital. It's to protect others and not
Okay.
yourself. That's what we use here. I
Okay.
don't
All
know.
right.
Yeah, people have seen it, but yeah, there's lots of people wearing cloth mask here.
Okay. So cloth masks will work to a degree.
Yes,
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. Now, you have been in the UK for the past 7 years?
5 years.
5 years. 5 years, yeah? By yourself.
Yes.
Now, how has being apart from your family and your the friends that you grew up with and your fellow Filipinos been affecting you in dealing with this pandemic?
So when you first come here, it's really difficult, but you've got to keep your communication lines open, and as you stay here for long, you do get used to it. You make new friends, and you make friends that become your family. So if you
Uh-huh.
have that kind of group, social setting, so even if you're far away, then you can cope. In terms of during the pandemic, so I always made it a point to check on my family, even if it's just a message or a chat, because you're too tired after work. It doesn't have to be proper video chat, but when I do get a chance, so I do video chat with my family. So that's my ways of coping during that time. But even now, of course, you continue regular video chats.
There's also a time difference, right? Right now it's what, 2 o'clock
It's
there?
2 a.m. here, yeah.
So that makes it hard to maintain communication too.
It might for other people. For me, my mom doesn't sleep like until 1 or 2 a.m. So I
Okay.
can chat here after lunch, and she's fully awake and able to chat properly, without being sleepy or anything like that.
Now, how has your family dealt with the pandemic?
So
Do
I've,
you worry about them?
of course, definitely, I worry about them, and I've instructed them strictly. If there's no reason to go out at all, don't go out. If things can be delivered, have it delivered, and make sure you clean the parcel before you touch anything, you know, because somebody might have coughed on it, or on the way, the virus landed on that parcel. so have it cleaned. Although there's an issue, there is a controversy with vitamins, but it won't do you any harm. So I've told them to take vitamins, always eat proper
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
food and proper hydration, and if possible, don't go out. So far they follow that, and they're all safe. Yeah,
Imagine if you have a nurse in the family and they still don't believe you.
that would be that would be bad.
Now, you mentioned something about vitamins, taking supplements, and are you of the opinion that if you feel some symptoms, you just load up on vitamin C? Does that work?
That would be too late. You take vitamins before you get any symptoms. That's to boost
Mm-hmm.
your immune system. But if you already have the symptoms, vitamins won't do you, it won't cure you, won't relieve the symptoms. So if
Okay,
you want to take
so
vitamins, take it regardless of, there's COVID or not, just to keep your immune system strong.
if you do have if you're starting to show symptoms, what do you do? Here in
So
the
you isolate,
Philippines, uh-huh.
yeah,
Here in the Philippines, hospitals are overwhelmed. We're running out of beds. There are doctors who are no longer capable of seeing the patients that they're supposed to see. So, in a previous interview with a medical doctor, we talked about how if you start feeling symptoms, you should head to a hospital or speak to a doctor immediately. And one of our listeners commented that hospitals will turn you away.
yeah.
So, what
So
can you do?
from my side, I would say it's the same advice here. If you start having symptoms, you immediately isolate yourself. If it's something that you can find like something to alleviate it, like for example you're having sore throat, you can have lozenges, have lemon and salt, or gargle, or you can drink ginger and lemon infusions. You
Uh-huh.
basically try to relieve it. If you have fever, take paracetamol. You only go to the hospital when it starts to affect your breathing. So I have actually one of my flatmates here. He had fever for straight 14 days, and it was on
Oh
day
my.
10. He started because if you're taking paracetamol regularly, there's a chance that it could affect your liver function. So on day
Uh-huh, yeah.
10, he started having nausea and then vomiting. So we were querying that he might have had too much of the paracetamol.
Oh.
So we
Yeah,
tried,
yeah.
and he started having, well, he still could speak in sentences. So just a mild shortness of breath. So we tried to call an ambulance. They have very strict guidelines. They ask you loads of questions. And if you don't meet the criteria, they're not going to come to you. They're going to direct you to a website, which is a government advice website on how to alleviate your symptoms. So hospitals are left for those who really need it, and who definitely need intervention in terms of breathing. So if you just have a fever, stay at home, eat properly, have enough rest, hydrate, take paracetamol. When it starts
Okay.
to affect your breathing, you will have that sense of doom, like, or I feel like I'm gonna be really short of breath, like I might die later on, or in 1 or 2 days. So when you get to that point, then yeah, go to the hospital. By doing this, uh,
Okay.
you are helping to keep this bed space for patients who really need it, but also you're preventing the spread of the virus because you are isolating yourself.
Now there are still some persistent rumors I can't say that they're reports going online that if you suspect that you have the coronavirus in your system, you should take antibiotics. And the WHO has stringently denied this form of self-medication.
That's definitely wrong, because if you go back to your basics, antibiotics is for bacteria.
Uh-huh.
coronavirus with a name on it is a virus, so the antibiotic won't do anything. It might be that you
Okay.
have a different chest infection. For those who who say that, oh, we improved after taking this type of antibiotic, I think they had bacterial infection, and that's why it worked for them. But if you have proper virus,
Ah,
even if you take loads of antibiotics, even if you double dose the antibiotics, it won't solve the viral problem.
wow. Okay, that really makes sense.
Yeah, that's like basic virology, and
Now, can you talk to us the procedure in the UK or maybe in hospitals in general? What if I do have COVID-19 and I check myself into a hospital? What happens there?
so you come in with a symptom.
Yes, with the symptoms and with the very high likelihood that I have COVID-19.
Okay, so you will first get tested. So when, of course, so you queue outside of the emergency department. You get asked the questions. If you meet the criteria and you have COVID symptoms, you go to the red zone. You are assessed by a doctor there, and if your
Uh-huh.
symptoms are severe enough, then they will, or if you have like existing comorbidities that can make it worse, if your symptoms start flaring up, then you will be for admission. But if you are not short of breath, you're walking around, you have enough energy, you're not weak, you don't have diabetes, hypertension, or other asthma or other comorbidities, then there's a high chance you will be sent home and told to self isolate and take paracetamol. And
Okay.
if you are on the other side, then you will be admitted, all the necessary tests done. So you will have a COVID swab test, you'll have the MRSA screen, which is a routine screen here in the UK. You'll have your bloods taken, chest x ray, and then you will be in a side room, basically an isolation room. In an ideal world, it should have a negative pressure, but not all hospitals have that. So in some hospitals, it's good enough that it's a single room that the patient is by himself. So even if your COVID swab test is negative, if your X-ray very clearly shows consolidation, which is similar, or confirming COVID, then you will still be treated as COVID positive, and then you will be staying in the hospital until all your symptoms are
Okay.
alleviated, or you are well enough to go home and self isolate.
How long? How long after will you be sent home?
It depends really. So in the past few weeks, we've had a patient who was just there overnight because he had an
Oh,
acute shortness of breath. But the next day, he was, no shortness of breath, no need for oxygen, breathing was
excuse
fine,
me.
no temperature. He was sent home in the afternoon. But we've also
Okay.
had more elderly patients initially starting with mild symptoms that became worse. So they had to stay for like 7 to 10 days. And when they were well enough to get back to their normal activities, they could walk, they could speak in full sentences, they could eat properly, then they were sent home when with the advice given for isolation.
Now, I understand that the form of therapy and interventions would be different patient to patient, depending on what kind of symptoms they exhibit. But generally, what can you expect? What kind of treatments will you be subjected to if you have COVID-19?
So that's the odd thing. There's no like proper COVID treatment. So it's more of a symptomatic treatment. So
Uh-huh.
if you are having trouble in breathing, your oxygen is saturation is low, then we give you oxygen. If you are tiring and you can't breathe for yourself, then we put up the machine to help you breathe.
The
If
CPAP.
you are having fever, The CPAP, yeah. If you
Uh-huh.
if you are having fever, we give you paracetamol. If in your bloods it looks like you're also dehydrated, we give you intravenous fluids. And if
Uh-huh.
it and if when we check your other nutritional parameters, if it looks like you are undernourished, then we give you food supplements. It's basically to reestablish your immune system, to make you stronger
Hmm.
again to fight the virus. But um, it really depends on what symptoms you are exhibiting.
So for with that being said, when somebody says that they are recovered from the coronavirus, that means they've beaten the symptoms, not the virus itself. Is that correct?
Yes, so they've beaten the symptoms, and um, if it's after 14 days, then most likely they won't be able to spread it anymore.
Okay. All right. Because we do know that there is still no existing drug or medicine for the coronavirus.
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. Now, I have a few more questions for you. How long do you work in the hospital
So
regularly and now with the pandemic?
so our normal shifts is 12.5 hours. You get an
Wow.
hour break, so the work hours is basically 11 and a half
Uh-huh.
hours. So we only have two shifts. It's either day or night shift. So during the pandemic, shifts are still the same, but because of staff being isolated, then you do more shifts, but that is paid as an extra shift. We call it here a bank shift.
Uh-huh.
So you get paid. It's a little bit higher in terms of the rate, but it depends on you if you want to do it. It's not a mandatory. Just because we're short, we're gonna
Oh.
force you to do this work. No. So if you're willing and able, then yes, you can do the extra shift to help out.
So basically you have your regular shifts except for possible overtime.
Yeah. So you have uh, a total of 13 shifts every 28 days.
Uh-huh.
So that's like 3 weeks, you have 3 working days, and on the fourth week, you have 4 days. So
Okay.
all the other days are your days off, and you can do whatever you like, basically.
Now, here in the Philippines, just recently there was the call for many cities in Luzon to be put under to be put back on enhanced community quarantine for the next 2 weeks
Mhm.
out of as a call from the medical frontline workers to decongest hospitals and to enable a re-strategizing. Now, that raised some concerns that focusing too much on health could be detrimental to the economy, whereas others say that if you don't focus on health, there will be no economy to go back to. Now, you as a
I was
nurse,
just gonna say that.
what is your stand in this?
So if it was a few months back, then I would say definitely health first. The one you just said, I was thinking what you just said. If
Hmm.
if what will be the use of the economy if there's no more people to to
Well,
work or to enjoy it.
let's just put it
So
bluntly. What's the use of the economy if everybody's dead?
yeah, that was my that will be my stand a few months back. But I guess nowadays, if you are able to adhere to the guidelines, then you can balance it out as long as you follow it strictly. But if there's any point at all where people cannot follow the guidelines, then yeah, back to lockdown.
Okay. All right. Yeah. That's sensible. There are also reports that hospitals are lacking the manpower because nurses have either succumbed to the COVID-19 or have now refused to work because of the sheer danger that being
Mm.
exposed to the environment and the lack of protective equipment puts them in. Now, how do you think this would fare for the hospitals in the next few months if, well, the coronavirus isn't going to slow down?
That's gonna be really difficult. What I will say to those who've quit or have taken rest days is if you get it and you only get the mild symptoms and you're lucky enough to have that, then it's really important that we try to go back and work to help out, because we'll be thankful that we only got those mild symptoms. And as medical professionals, it is our duty to promote health and care for people. So yeah, if although it is a personal choice, if you do have someone, let's say like a 90-year-old grandpa you're living with, and you want to
Mm-hmm.
protect that person, then fair enough. But if you're a single person living in an apartment and you just choose not to because you're afraid, then for me that's a bit, that's cowardly, and I won't really support that. We really have to stand up, and we need to work together, because if everybody thinks the same way, then there will be no nurses left to help out in this pandemic.
Okay, that's very insightful. Now, I have just one last question for you, Jacob, since it is nearly 3 a.m. where you are. What do you have to say for your fellow medical workers, especially those who are dealing in hospitals that have a very high number of infected patients there, in order to keep going, because it doesn't look like this pandemic is gonna be over anytime soon?
So for those frontliners who are still fighting the good fight, first of all, everyone obviously are very grateful, and we thank you for doing your part. So if you get tired, so do the shifts that you are required to do, and if you're tired, take a break. Don't be a hero and take loads of extra shift or extend your hours, even if you know within yourself that this is the part where you just stop and you need to rest. So don't overwork yourself, because that's not really going to help out. That's not going to help anyone. So do your required shifts, rest, and you come back revitalized, so that will make you help many more people, rather than overworking, you get really exhausted, and then you get ill, then you miss out for the next few weeks or a few months. Then the number of nurses or doctors or other care workers decrease, then it's not going to help. So just keep fighting, take a rest, hydrate, eat properly, you know basic health stuff, really. But
All
the most
right.
important part is, don't forget to rest and care for yourself.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was Jacob Reyes, a nurse working in London, one of the hotbeds of COVID infections in the world. As he said, this fight that the nurses, the doctors, the medical workers have is the good fight. And let's not forget to give them their due. And for those who are dealing with this pandemic, whether you're a patient, you're a family member, or somebody who works in the front line, don't forget that we all have our parts to do in taking care of ourselves in order to make sure that we can care for others. Is that right, Jacob?
That's correct. Can I share? I have a YouTube channel which I
Oh,
started
sure.
during the peak of the pandemic. It's basically because there was nothing much to do. So if you can check out my channel, it's Jake UKRN. That's JAKE space UKRN, and
Uh-huh.
you'll know about the realities of nursing in the UK, answers to your frequently asked questions, and about life in UK in general. So have a look, and if you like it, please subscribe to me.
All right. Well, that sounds exciting. We're going to definitely give that a check. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we have to let Jacob go. He needs to take his rest because he has the good fight to keep fighting.
Thanks, John.
And for the rest of our listeners, please continue to listen to Monster Radio and to check out our Facebook page, Monster Radio BT 105.9, because we frequently put out content and we play great music to keep you guys updated and to keep you company as we face the fifth month of this pandemic, and we've got a long way to go. So I hope that all of us will find the time to support each other and to keep on keeping on. That's it from me today, Southside. I hope to see you within the week. See you around here on Monster Radio, BT 105.9. Bye.
Bye.